November 9, 1989, the Berlin Wall falls. Thousands flood the streets, overwhelming the East German border guard and tearing down one of the Cold War's most powerful symbols. Across the Eastern Bloc, communism was collapsing. Some regimes did it peacefully, while others did it through violence, with its last breath being the collapse of the Soviet Union. In East Asia, the weakening and eventual collapse of the Soviet Union had significant ripple effects. The most notable example is North Korea, which suddenly found itself without its military and economic backer. The 1990s were especially harsh for the regime. Without Soviet support, North Korea faltered, and its agricultural system was unable to meet the needs of its population. This culminated in a devastating famine, the worst in the country's history, which took the lives of hundreds of thousands. Unlike its European counterparts, North Korea's regime endured. Hopes for reunification with the South faded, and the Kim family maintained an iron grip on its power. North Korea's ruling elite doubled down their Stalinistic ruling style of governance, relying on repression, censorship, and a cult of personality to stifle dissent and control the population. Despite internal strife and economic hardship, the regime managed to survive long after the fall of the Berlin Wall. At the same time, Pyongyang sought to bolster its strategic standing through the development of nuclear weapons and long-range missile technology. These advancements gave North Korea leverage in the region, allowing it to punch above its economic and military weight, particularly when facing its far more advanced neighbors. And over the 3 decades after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Kim dynasty remains in control. Any scenario that leads to the collapse of the North Korean regime would certainly result in the downfall of Kim Jong-un and his family. This could happen through internal unrest, where the regime crumbles under its own failures, much like Nicolae Ceausescu's Romania, bringing the entire regime down with him. Alternatively, his death could trigger a power shift where the Kim family is removed, but the communist system survives, much like the Soviet Union after the death of Stalin. The most speculated way, however, is a war that ultimately topples the regime. War is what most people think when they think of North Korea, and is also the most straightforward way for the regime to fall, because unless they somehow get total Chinese commitment to what would be a long and costly war, it would certainly lead to the regime's collapse. That is not to say that North Korea's military wouldn't be able to cause a destructive war, or that South Korea, its immediate neighbors, and the whole world wouldn't suffer immensely. A war would mean the bombardment by North Korean artillery against Seoul and the destruction of South Korea's main economic assets. But this advantage wouldn't last, and American technological superiority would guarantee its ultimate success in a war. As for the use of its nuclear assets, North Korea would be in a delicate position concerning its use, because any nuclear attacks against itself or American bases in the Pacific would be met by mutual destruction. Paradoxically, its main deterrent assets would do nothing but accelerate its downfall. And for their Chinese allies, all seeing the existence of the North Korean regime as useful as a buffer state to maintain American influence and troops away from their borders, they wouldn't risk as much as their economical relationship with South Korea and a direct war with America, just to save their buffer state. They would probably let the regime die down and assert their influence in the region to get the most out of the situation. On the other hand, the collapse could come from within the regime, though the scenario is much harder to imagine. A popular revolt is nearly impossible. Any uprising by the North Korean people would be crushed with absolute brutality by the regime's security apparatus. The military, however, poses a different potential threat, but even a coup from within the army faces significant obstacles. For one, the military leadership would need a compelling reason to risk overthrowing Kim Jong-un. Without a clear path to success, they'd be gambling their position and lives and the safety of their families. A failed coup would result in a brutal purge, with anyone involved spending the rest of their lives in prison or being executed. The second challenge lies in what happens if the coup actually succeeds. The power vacuum that follows could send the regime spiraling in various directions. One possibility is that, with the Kim family gone, the fragile house of cards that is the North Korean state could collapse entirely. In such a scenario, the military might be forced to accept a reunification with the South, likely under heavy mediation from Russia and China, to protect their local interests. Another outcome is that the military would seize control, restructuring the state with themselves at its center. This could allow North Korea to limp forward, existing in a state of stagnation for a few more decades, maintaining its isolation while avoiding total collapse. For China, this would be the ideal outcome, as they would maintain their buffer state without instability and provocations that constantly threaten the region. North Korea and their military would still serve China's interests, while minimizing the risk of an unwanted war. As we reflect on North Korea amidst the broader geopolitical landscape, it becomes clear that the regime faces existential challenges. While the fall of the Qing dynasty seems inevitable in the long run, the paths to its collapse remain uncertain, whether through a destructive war that would reshape the Korean peninsula but also destabilize the whole region, or through internal strife that could lead to a military coup. The lessons learned from the fall of communism serve as a reminder that no regime is immune to the future. Yet unlike their European counterparts, North Korea's dynamics, like its nuclear arsenal, the loyalty of its military, and the protective buffer it provides to China, complicate the prospect for a peaceful resolution. In its end, the fate of North Korea will not only destabilize the region, but also have far-reaching consequences for East Asia's political future.